Hello and welcome to the final episode in our Insider Threat series. It's myself again, Jay Cutfield, Network and Security Solution Specialist, and Ben Large. So we're going to be talking to you a little bit around networks and how network protections, with our partner Cisco, can prevent an insider threat.
So IPS IDS is a good start. Some people do need to write custom rule sets that they can do that would detect this kind of activity. So things like scanning activity, port scans, maybe malicious transfers, for example, over on non-standard ports. But a good start is to really make sure you provide adequate ACLs against the firewall, so access control lists against the firewall to limit what access the user should have to the network. Because there's no point having things like RDP open for users. Why would you want to use to RDP across the network unless they have a resource they need to access? The same would be, do you want them to RDP home? I see no sense in the security point of view that a user being able to RDP home unless there's a genuine business reason for it. So write the ACL to block it.
Right, so we'd almost say you can apply the principles of least privilege to the
Correct.
Majority of users.
Yeah, that's the idea, because most people will be quite passive in their rules. They don't want to upset the user, but obviously you've got to think now these days with GDPR, you've got to think, well, you're going to get a fine if a user leaks the data. So while you can trust the user to some degree, there is some role-based control you need to put against an employee to say, like mine in your role, for example, we have certain accesses and controls in an Ultima, but maybe the sales team are totally different to us. It's just depending on our role and our requirement inside the business. So we have test environments, but they have no need to access such instances. We talked earlier about the SSL scanning. You'd always want to make sure that the device is capable of SSL scanning all your traffic across the environment. To be honest, we said over 90% of the traffic is encrypted, so you want to be able to see what's going on at that point. If you can't see it and you can't see what's actually going on in that sphere, there'll be some things like banking you need to add exceptions for, which is understandable, but you'll be able to accept those URLs or those IPs for those specific systems. But you'd start off at that point. It'll be things like DNS. Do you want to be able to access the company DNS server, or are you allowing that user to access a DNS server off the network? I won't tell you the tap because I don't know how far the video would go, but there are reasons I'm saying don't allow external DNS from users that they don't need to. Use your own or the company-owned DNS server. There is a novel attack there.
Okay, well, some good insights from your colourful past, let's say.
Segmentation is a very good way of limiting an attack. So if you work off a device will get compromised and what could impact next to it or near to it. So let's say your SQL server. You don't want your domain controller next to your SQL server on the same network. You want it segmented in separate collision domains, so you don't have an impact cause and effect. So if an attacker does get onto it, or an insider, as we're talking today, gets onto that machine and uses that as a pivot point in the network, you don't want automatically to be able to get straight onto the SQL server and cause a compromise, because SQL is going to hold your data, or I can't say Oracle might hold your data as well, the specific vendors. But you've got to think of where the data could be or where it's held. So servers are quite an important one. The same would be as well users and roles. So what we said earlier about the user and the endpoint, you've also got to think of role specific. So if we put a scenario, HR, sales, talent, all those people have different requirements in the network, but why have them on the same network? They could be on a LAN, but separate ones themselves with different ACLs around them. If you think of it from a malware perspective, a piece of malware hits that environment, the first thing is WannaCry proved a lot with where it went round so rife, is it will go around the network and it will spread and it will spawn and cause more problems. But I saw a statistic recently, some of the malwares go around in 7 minutes. You think microsegmentation is a good way to limit that exposure, because if you've got an instant response plan ready to rock and roll, you can turn that port off, you can turn that network connectivity between those separate segments of the network, and your HR department aren't infected. Your IT team aren't infected. You can save some part of the business, because if you're down that path, you could be in quite a lot of trouble at that point.
Yeah. And I guess you can take these principles, when we talk about firewalling, segmentation, and everyone's on their journey to the cloud, to SaaS, etc. No one wants hardware anymore. Realistically, if I was to set up a company now, I'd have a laptop. Everyone will be working from home, for example. We can apply all those principles to the cloud. Virtualized firewalls, cloud firewalls. I guess the only other thing to talk about around there, Cisco Cloud Lock, as it was called, but CASB is obviously, I'd say, a great control, because you have a end user, an insider, and this is very accidental, right? Needs, say, I don't know, an application to do their job, you know, Trello, for example, from a project management standpoint. But is that what if they go and they, you know, subscribe to what they think is a SaaS application that they would think was safe, and it turns out it's just a malicious one farming credentials, right?
It's obviously having applications per role is a good start. There will be some applications that you and I will need and other people wouldn't. PUT is a good example. There's no need for a lot of admins out there to have, they would use it with their day-to-day, but salespeople would never need it. If it's on the machine, it can be used against you, and if it's on your end-user machines now, I would certainly get rid of it. Personally, if the admins have got it, fine, but not your end users, unless it's a business requirement. But it's things like that, being able to limit access of software down to basically, obviously you've got to think of the licensing impact as well, because each of those bit of software's on, you've got to license them as well, and if they're not being used, you could save yourself a bit of money as well at the end of the day. Softwares you've got to think about as well, it needs to be patched, it needs to be checked. It might not be supported anymore by the vendor of choice at that point, at the application point, so you've got to make sure that it's supported and it is functioning as it should do. If there's a vulnerability, it can be used against you as well inside the network.
And realistically, that is an insider threat, right?
Yeah.
You know, unknown apps, shadow IT.
It is shadow IT, yeah.
We have, you know, people download stuff they don't think, they end up with an unsupported, unpatched version of which a vulnerability gets published, you know, dark web goes mad, and all of a sudden you've got an internal access broker.
But that comes onto the whole, you know, you said shadow IT, but also users are victims to say that here's the new version of any specific piece of software out there. I won't name them for the video, but you will be victimized to say, oh, here's a new version, would you like to do it? A lot of talk in the community about everyone's waiting for this new piece of software. Because I bet you that new game that everyone's been waiting for, that's the driving game, should I say, without saying it, if someone was to release a scam email with go click for downloading that new piece of gaming software, people would download it and there'd be a lot of victims of that attack. But that's how social engineering works, and obviously from an insider point of view, they could be crafting these things against people. You just don't know what they will do, because when you're an insider inside an organization, you have prior knowledge of a lot of things that are going on, because you're in the inner circle of the business and you can use that information to detriment of that business and use it against them.
So I guess, you know, if any of this that you've heard has, you know, touched home as such, you know, Ultima can help you define this, right? We have network readiness assessments, we have cloud security health checks, anything like that. So please, again, do get in touch, myself or Ben, you know, or your account manager, and we can obviously point you in the right direction and help you define, you know, what a strong posture within your network from a security standpoint and within cloud from a security standpoint would look like, and how best to get you there.